Happy Monday, practice community members. Welcome to this week's Monday message. In this week's Monday message, I'm going to take a little detour from teaching on business, and we've also been talking a lot about what makes great coaches great, coming alongside our 21-day free course, which we are just on week 2. So if you haven't joined yet or have joined but haven't gotten started, there's still plenty of time. So I recommend popping in there today. If you want to be a part of that course and haven't gotten in there yet, comment below, we'll put you in. Again, it's 3 weeks, it's totally free. And this week we kick off what are the skills of great coaches. And to come alongside that, I wanted to share something that I've been getting asked a fair amount of questions about, both in my inbox. Sometimes I get it from people who are looking at training programs, or just people in general who know the extensiveness of my training background and are curious about how I navigated the wide, vast world of coach trainings. So today I want to share with you your questions about the coach training world answered. And there are a few, quite a few. Maybe you're already a professional coach who went through an ICF accredited program. Maybe you don't know what the heck the ICF is. Totally okay if you don't. Or maybe you're brand new to this coach thing and you're not sure what or how to begin. So wherever you are on that spectrum, I hope you take today and listen to this little message about the coach training world, because whether you're in it or not, if you're in the coach world, then this is some information and knowledge I think you should have in your back pocket. It's also helpful when your clients ask you, if they ask you, few do, but if they ask you about your training or accreditation or the world of coaching in general. And also if someone ever comes alongside, not that you have to care or respond to it, but if people come alongside and ask you, isn't coaching kind of just hoaxy advice giving for money? You can gently refute that and share some, I think, much more beneficial insight into the wide world of coaching, what it actually is, and why the heck we're such dorks about it, because we all love it so much, myself included. So let's dive in. Here is the problem with an unregulated industry, and coaching is an unregulated industry. What that means is there's no licensure board, governing body that is appointed by the state or the country, with the exception of a couple. There are a couple who have gone ahead and regulated it. But for the most part, it's an unregulated industry, which means there's no one overseeing the standardization of both practice, cost, and fulfillment of coaching. And that can leave us in two really interesting camps. Camp one says, well, that's great. I have all this freedom and autonomy, and I can basically do whatever the heck I want, charge whatever I want, and there's no ethical repercussion, or I should say no legal repercussion, ethics aside, to do that. And while technically that's true, there's the other camp that says, well, then I don't even know where to begin, because it's too open-ended for me to discern, and that feels like there should be some standardization. And so for me, here's where it lands. There's standards, but there's not standards. There's options for training and regulation, but they're pretty flexible. There's overseers and organizations that are setting those ethical guidelines, but they are for-profit organizations, and there's simply too many opinions in the coach kitchen. So wherever you fall in line with this information, I think it's good for you to not only be informed, but for you to form an opinion about it. Not only if you're asked, but because this is your work. This is the world you've chosen to dedicate yourself to, both your education to and your business acumen to, and you are choosing to navigate this industry. And I think if that's going to be a choice we make, then we better know what comes alongside it. Let's break the problem down a little further. So first, few know the roots of the coaching world. And while many people believe coaching was born from the sports world and the motivational interviewing made popular in the 80s by people like Jim Rohn and Brian Tracy, it's not actually from those worlds. And while coaching certainly can be extracted from those places and is certainly found in those places, coaching goes much further back and is more likened to the onset of positive psychology that came out of Martin Seligman's work, back in the 60s and 70s. It's still a very new industry, but coaching has much deeper roots than we might imagine. It is not actually rooted in motivation whatsoever. It's rooted in supporting people to have a positive outlook and strength-based approach to both their psychology and their emotional well-being, allowing people to move forward. The second problem is that coaching quickly gets confused with mentoring. Coaching is a qualified process of forward-moving progress. It is not handing people a scripted pathway to success, but a lot of coaches or people who might deem themselves coaches are utilizing a non-coach approach, but calling it coaching. And instead of getting mad at the industry, I think we have to call people out by helping them recognize that's not actually what it is. And I know that this being an unregulated, unlicensed industry means there's no slap on the wrist, there's no fine, there's no repercussion for calling yourself a coach. But then it's my job to make sure I bolster and educate and inform my consumers so they can make better decisions for themselves. The third problem is that coaching's cousins are counseling and consulting. Coaching is somewhere in the middle. We're not there to diagnose and help our clients heal. We're not there to prescribe a pathway to success. We're somewhere in the middle. We are there to help people move toward choice. We are what we call options facilitators that help people expand on their perspective, reshape their relationship to their belief system, which then affects their habits, their behaviors, their choices, their opportunities, and subsequently their future, their progress, their goals, their desires. That's what we do. And I could break it down so much further than that, but I hope you understand that you're so much more than a helper and you're so much more vast than a supplier of knowledge. You help people evoke from within them knowledge and basis of awareness from which they can reorient their entire life. To me, it doesn't get much better than that. So here's what I think great coach trainings do. And I want to break it down for you in just the training realm, because there's the skill of coaching, there's the business of coaching, and then there's the training and educational component of coaching. And I hope that you engage with all three on a pretty regular basis. I know for me, I'm always trying to better myself as a coach, better my practices and my actual practice of coaching, and better my business of how I invite people into coaching. So today we're specifically focusing on what makes a great coach training a great coach training. So before I dive into a few things that I've carved out here that I think make great coach trainings possible, let's look at the overarching overview of the training world if you're not familiar with it or no one's ever walked you through it. And I can tell you right now, I was never walked through it. It was something that I had to piecemeal together by going through a handful of trainings over a number of years that I finally got a big picture of what this thing is that I was already doing. So coaching, again, being an unregulated industry, you are not required by law to be an educated coach. However, I deeply, deeply hope that you are, because these processes are not something that you just naturally know how to do. You probably are naturally empathetic, compassionate, inspired, hopeful, and like to help people. That's great. Then we get to layer on top of that a very specific process and skill set that we call coaching. But being unregulated, that doesn't mean that you can just put your coach shield up and be great at coaching. You can call yourself a coach and be awful at it. But if you want to be great at it, then here's some things I think you need to know. There are a handful of organizations that are what we might call the overseers of the coach industry. And the two primary ones are the ICF, which stands for the International Coach Federation, and the AC, the Association for Coaching. Both of those organizations are overseen by something called the GCMA, the Global Coaching and Mentoring Alliance, and they are a organization that oversees both the ethical oversight of coaches as well as the educational standards that these organizations are attempting to put forth. So even though you cannot, although some universities now supply it, you can't go and get a BA in coaching and then get a licensure like you might as a mental health counselor or therapist. And so these organizations have said, okay, there's got to be some kind of standardization. Here's a basic educational foundation we can put in place that coaches can go through, acquire hours, get supervision, practice coaching in front of their teachers, take on clients, start to accrue hours, and then they can submit those hours to one of these boards, ICF or the AC, and be given a accreditation as a coach. And in order to do that, you have to go through a training program that has also been overlooked by one of these organizations and is accredited in its programness, if you will. So those are the two tracks that primarily exist. And then beneath that is a whole host of training programs that are not accredited by any organization, but are still supplying really phenomenal education. I myself have gone through an ICF accredited course. I've gone through a non-ICF accredited course, actually two of them, and I've created a non-accredited course, which is in the midst of being accredited as we speak. And so I've run the gamut, and I can tell you that while the ICF and AC might have more regimented requirements for their training, that gives you, I think, a common language, which is very valuable. And then these non-accredited courses give you a sprinkling of information and a way to dig into some of the work that might really call you that you might not get in an ICF or an AC accredited course, depending on the course itself. Okay, so that's the overview. And if you have questions about the basics of that, please comment below. I'm more than happy to come alongside and demystify some of that for you. Now let's dig into what I think the Great Coach trainings do, because they're not all created equal. I would be highly suspect of a training that you get online without any live support. I would be highly suspect of a training that you get that doesn't require more than a single practicum or practice session. I would be highly suspect of a course that you can complete in less than a week. This is an education. This is not a certificate you get at a 1-hour seminar. Coaching has a lot more depth to it than that, and I would look for a program that acknowledges the depth to training. So the first thing that I think a great coach training does is it prepares the ethics. Unregulated does not equate to unethical. You can be an ethical, and you better be an ethical, integral standardization coach who is following guidelines that are there not just to keep you safe, those are there to keep your client safe. And those are guidelines that I think your client should have access to. It's really easy to link to them. And if you're not currently an accredited coach or haven't gone through a training, then at the very least familiarize yourself with those ethical standards and just understand that there's some expectation here because you're working with people and you're responsible to that person's well-being. Ethical guidelines also tell you where your scope of practice is and where it is not. It keeps you in your lane. And that's good. We need you to stay in your lane. By all means, if you were also trained in NLP or yoga or massage therapy or art therapy or journal therapy or a myriad of other practices, bring them in. That becomes part of your scope of practice. But if you're not trained in those modalities, don't dabble where you don't need to dabble. I also think great coach trainings prepare the container. There's more to transformational coaching than the actual conversations, and what you put around that conversation can influence and impact the type of conversation you have, which subsequently influences and impacts the result of that conversation. So a few things that you have to prepare. You have to prepare your agreements, and agreements are explicit, mutually agreed upon they're just mutually agreed upon things that you and the client are going to hold yourselves accountable to. Agreements are usually around things like time, cost, frequency, scope of practice, things like that. You also must excavate from your clients their expectations. Expectations are implicit, so they're internal. Implicit agreements, if you will, the person has with you that they may not have shared with you about how something should be. Think of it like a standardized rule that someone's upholding and wants you to uphold, but they haven't actually shared it with you. We have to get at what those are. You also have to create safety and rapport continuously. It isn't enough to create safety in the first session. You have to create safety with the first engagement all the way through to the last engagement. And that rapport over time does contribute to the way in which the work unfolds. Great coach trainings also put you in the right seat. What that means is you're trained in a process, not a product. You're not trained as a coach in outcomes. You're trained as a coach in positive input practices. These are processes and they work every time. The client's responsible for their result. You're responsible for the process that yields them a result, but you're not there to specify how, when, for what purpose. That's not up to you. You aren't meant to perfect your client's results for them. Otherwise, they're not actually doing the work. You are. And that's not a coach, that's a consultant. Your process will work every time if you let it work every time. You have to put the emphasis on the right place. Great coach trainings teach you about inputs. Your client is not sabotaging themselves and they are not weak-willed. And another thing I want you to remember is that motivation is not transformation. You cannot bypass someone's internal model of the world, their beliefs, their habits, their emotions, their stories, their memories, their perceptions of the world, the way that they construct their reality. You can't overcome that with motivation. You can't rah-rah someone out of stuckness. You can use the process of coaching to help them rewire and reorient their relationship to their model of the world, which then subsequently changes their model of the world, making reality quite flexible. But your clients are a series of habits fueled by beliefs and stories. And if you're not trained in how to work with the inputs are the things we do every day based on what we think, how we feel, what we see, what we need, what we decide, unconsciously running in the background without pause. That's what you're working with. And if you're only working with outputs, action steps, strategies, steps, you're going to be hanging out there for a long time and not seeing a lot of results. Great coach trainings are taught by practicing coaches. I am so grateful to have taken my coach training, my very first one, from someone who was a teacher and a mentor, but she also had a full-time coach practice. And it really informed the way that she showed up. And I'll never forget that, because she wasn't just teaching theory, she was teaching application. She was able to pull from her experience, and that is so powerful. So do your teachers coach currently? Do they have full practices? If you are learning from a coach who never got their coach practice off the ground, I would run for the hills. Don't engage with that. That is not effective coach training. Your training needs to be more than a theory or a concept. It needs to have been applied, benefited from, and yielded results before you go and learn from it. Great coach trainings teach you about business. Coaching and business are two different skills. And a lot of coach trainings put a high level of emphasis on the skill of coaching, which is important, but they forget to put the emphasis on the skill of business. And sometimes this is because the coach either wasn't successful in business, and so they don't teach it. They don't have a full practice. They don't know how to support you in having a full practice, or they are a full-time teacher and that is their job, in which case being a business person is not their priority. So does your coach who's teaching you about coaching have a successful business? I would inquire about that. If you're a trained coach with no clients, you're probably going to get bored, and you're also going to get frustrated. And then the emphasis is going to become all about the business of coaching and not about coaching itself. And last, coaching is not a marketing product. It's an invitational product. And what that means is you're not going to have as much success from marketing coaching as you will from inviting people into coaching. Coaching is invitational, but most of us are not making invitations. We're promoting stuff. Flip the switch and see what happens. All right, if you liked where this came from, come hang out with us in 21 Days of Powerful Coaching. We started week 2 today. We're only 1 week in. We've got 2 more full weeks to go. It's right here inside the community, and it's totally free. Just a quick reminder, last week we talked about getting back to the basics, reconnecting with the foundation of coaching, and those 3 core pillars to powerful coaching. This week, we're going to dive into skills of the most powerful coaches and what I think the great coaches do, most of which you've never heard of or don't think about as great coaching. I'm also going to share 10 skills of the best coaches and what I personally model my coaching after. Next week, we're going to talk about where are we going. So if you're new to the industry, or you're a little jaded by the industry, or you're hesitant to get into it because you feel like it's overly saturated, I want to break this apart. This is a myth. We're not overly saturated, not nearly as much as you might anticipate. So I'm going to share where we're going as an industry, 5 easily missed opportunities for coaches, and we'll break down that question, aren't there too many coaches already? And don't forget, if you are ready to take your own coach training to the next level, we are currently enrolling in my 200-hour Awaken Your Life Coach Training Program. Our next cohort begins on May 18th, and we do have 2 spots left. If you're curious, interested, haven't had a chance to dive into it, have questions, want to get on the phone and talk about it, please let me know, comment below, message me in the little chat button. I'm happy to come alongside and support you in any which way that I can. All right, it's your turn. This is a lot of information. Please engage with it, comment, play with it. And if you want to come into 21 Days to Powerful Coaching and you're not a part of that course yet, comment below. We'll add you right away. All right, guys, happy Monday. I'll see you later.